Alright guys, back here again today, Paintsville Lake. Been getting some questions about my camera setup and what I use, how I capture my footage. It enables me to catch some really good stuff, so let's take a look at a few of these things. So what I typically do and where I catch the most footage, at least in my fish catches, the Yolotek. Now obviously I'm doing a lot on the back end here using Final Cut to edit, and we'll talk about editing here in just a minute. Okay, so GoPro Hero 5, that's what I've also got up here on the side that I'm catching my B-roll footage. Sometimes I'll shove that one underwater, sometimes I'll put it on a pole. I've put it on the net. You can do a lot of things with that other camera. Okay, so let's talk about cameras for just a second. What are the settings on this camera and what do I do? Well, first of all, I run a 128 gig a card. I think they recommend up to a 64, but I've been running a 128 for a long time, probably since I got the camera. Really had no issues. First thing we're gonna do, gonna hop over to preferences, and we're gonna scroll down to format SD card. I would recommend you always do that when you put a new memory card or a memory card. Maybe you shot film yesterday and you bring that memory card back out. You took that footage and you imported it to your computer or your iPad, wherever you edit. And then when you came back out today, you wanted to get rid of that footage. I would recommend that you format that here and do that twice. Do that 2 times, okay? And that should prevent any issues that you may have with an SD card error. Nothing worse when you get out fishing and to have an SD card error and perhaps lose that clip of that big fish that you caught that day. Okay, so once we formatted that SD card, all right, you can see with that 128 gig card, we get about 3 hours and 56 minutes, it looks like. Let's take a look at some camera settings here real quick. What I typically do is I typically film at 2.7K, even though I'm outputting at 1080, and I typically film at 60 frames per second, just because there are a lot of times, maybe when that fish splashes or something happens in the outdoors, that you want to be able to go back and slow-mo that moment. The reason I shoot in 2.7K is so that if I want to digitally zoom on my editing software on the back end, when I blow that picture up, at some point it's going to become pixelated. So when I shoot at 2.7K, it gives me a little more data to prevent that from happening. 2.7K, 60 frames per second, and I like that wide field of view just so that I capture everything. Sometimes that fish may not jump right by the boat, maybe on out in the water, and I want the ability to edit that and use that in my footage as well. So that being the case, I always have my settings in wide. So when you go to the right side, we look over here, I've got video stabilization on. To me, that's the great function of the GoPro and the outdoor cameras, is that ability to stabilize your video no matter how rough the conditions may be where you film. I use this on Lake Erie, so the stabilization is incredible. The average GoPro battery lasts about 1.5 hours to 2 hours. The Yolotek is a powered action camera. So as long as you have that camera plugged into the base and the stick plugged into your nav lights, as long as your nav lights are on your console, you never have to change a battery on those cameras. One of the tools that I use is the DJI Spark. DJI has since replaced the Spark with several newer models. The Spark's actually a different model drone at this point. But I can tell you that most of those drones fly the same way. Most of those drones have a lot of similar capabilities. I know I just purchased the Mavic Mini, so you can look here on my channel in the future for a review on that Mavic Mini. I haven't even flown it yet. So one of the nice flight modes for somebody capturing B-roll footage for fishing content is the ability to use active track in your flight modes. You can put your drone up, set the height, you can set how fast it rotates, but it will actively track. Maybe you and a partner like me and Cash fishing here at Lake Guntersville, and it will rotate around you on its own. Those DJI drones actually have the ability to sense objects in front of them, so it's a relatively easy to fly drone. Like I said, DJI has since replaced the Spark and made it actually a different model, but they've come up with several other drones. The Mavic Mini, which one of the other things that I use is the Sony A6400. That's what I'm shooting this footage here with. It's a really popular model for YouTubers and other people who are actively into creating content. And the Ronin gives me the ability to move, talk to the camera, and keep my camera relatively stable. And the DJI Ronin and the Sony A6400, again, are another tool for another day. So again, be sure you subscribe so that you don't miss those how-to videos in the future. First thing you need to know is the cameras are some work. there's a little bit of work in fooling with the memory cards, and there's a little bit of work in ripping the footage off and editing and all that, but there's a few options that you have that make that a little bit easier. You know, I'm using Final Cut, and you can see Final Cut here. Final Cut's a kind of a whole nother animal, and you know, we can talk about that on another day in another how-to video. For the time being, let's just talk about some of the simple editing tools that you can use. Some of those would be things like iMovie. You can get iMovie on your iPhone and pull those clips off your GoPro. Now, how are you going to pull those clips off? There's a few ways. Number one, you can pull it off via Bluetooth, connect to your camera with Wi-Fi on your cell phone, go to the GoPro app. You can pull those clips off that way. It is a little slower. You can take the SD card out, plug that into your home workstation, and pull those clips off and edit in Final Cut like I do. Subscribe to my channel, and in the future we'll talk a little bit about Final Cut and some of the basic tools we use and how we can output some really high-end footage just by using some of the basic tools in Final Cut.